Welcome to the Inland Valley Storytellers monthly story swap meeting. My name is John St. Clair, and I am your Zoom host and also the leader of this group. And we have a different backdrop. That's one thing about this meeting place. There's no art in here today, so it's just a blank wall as our backdrop, but it's not a bad background. And we love the acoustics here, much better than at the Forum, which is why we moved here. And I will say right now, the next 2 months, July and August, we will be meeting the second Tuesday because every Monday night during the summer, the city of Claremont has a huge band perform right next door to this building. So it would not be quiet on those nights. Plus, it would be impossible to find a parking place anywhere near. So for those who come in person. So the next 2 months, July and August, second Tuesday of those 2 months is what we will be doing. And both Nick and I have stories. I think because there's only 2 Zoom people, I can't do a spotlight. Let me look. I think you need at least 3 to do a spotlight.
Who's the other Zoomers?
Well, us and Nick. And we need 1 more person. So it'll just be going back and forth. While a story is being told, everyone try to be quiet because if you make a noise, it'll suddenly put you on the screen instead of the person telling the story. So Nick, do you want to go first or second?
I'll go second because that way, if Adrian or somebody else shows up, it'll be easier to do spotlights for the rest.
Yes, that's true. Okay, so I'm going to do a folktale from Poland, which I've told before, but it's been a long time, and I'm going to try to resurrect the story because it's kind of an interesting story. And it's called The King and the Peasant. Long ago, there was an old peasant farmer named Matthias. And one day, Matthias was working in his fields late in the day, trying to finish up. The sun was getting lower in the sky. And he looked off on the horizon, and off in the distance, he saw a glint, a reflection, a shining light, and it was moving towards him. And it took him a while to figure out because he couldn't really tell what the source was, but as the light moved closer to him, he saw that the light was a reflection of the sun off of the king's crown. And it was kind of bobbing up and down because the king was riding a horse and he was just returning with his entourage from a day of hunting out in the countryside. And they were heading back to the palace. And so old Matthias stopped for a minute to watch the procession get closer and closer. And to his surprise, the king stopped when it got next to his farm, and 4 horses turned with the king in the lead and rode right towards Matthias. And so when they got real close, Matthias dropped to his knees and bowed down to the king. And the king said, "Stand up, my friend. I have some questions for you." And so Matthias said, "Yes, your majesty. What would you like to ask him?" And the first question the king asked was, "Why did you not get up early enough to finish your work?" And Matthias thought for a minute, and then he said, well, I did get up, your majesty, but God intervened and I have no control over it." "I see," said the king. And then the king said, "How long have those white blossoms been on top of the sage mountaintop?" "Oh," Matthias thought, "I guess about 40 years. Oh, I see, said the king. And how many years have the rivers been flowing underneath that mountain? And Matthias said, it's been 15 years, Your Majesty, that the two rivers under the mountain have been flowing. I see, said the king. And he smiled. This is going well. I have one more question, and that is, when, if and when, the three silly geese from the east arrive at your place, will you be able to fleece them? And Matthias smiled. Oh, yes, Your Majesty, I will fleece them well. And then the king thanked Matthias and wished him good luck and said, may God bless us both. And he turned around, and the three other horses, which had his three counselors, his advisors, followed him back to the entourage, and they went on to the palace. Well, after they got back to the palace and ate dinner, the king summoned the three advisors. And he said, you all listened to the conversation I had with the farmer. Can you interpret our conversation? Can you tell me what we were communicating? And the three advisors kind of scratched their head and thought and tried several wild guesses, but none of them were anywhere near correct. And so the king said, tell you what, you have 30 days to figure out the riddles of our conversation, the conversation between me and the farmer. And if you don't figure it out, I'm going to fire you all and get new counselors because you guys aren't very smart. And so the three counselors, advisors left the king's chambers, and for the next 30 days, well, actually for the next 29 days, they racked their brains, they fed off of each other different ideas, and none of them could really come up with an explanation of what that conversation between the king and the farmer was about. And so finally they realized the only way they could find out is to go to the old farmer and have him tell them what the riddle was. And so the three of them got on their horses, they rode out into the countryside, and they went to Matthias's farm, and he invited them in and was very happy to see them, and gave them something to eat and drink. And then they asked him to explain the conversation he had had with the king. But Matthias wasn't telling them. They pleaded with him, but Matthias wasn't telling them. And finally, each of the three advisors took out a bag of gold coins and set it on the table and said, now will you tell us? And Matthias said, yes, I will. And so Matthias said the first question, when the king asked why I didn't get up early enough to be finished with my work, what he was really saying is, why didn't I marry and have kids so then when I got old, my sons and daughters could tend the field and I would be done with my work and wouldn't have to do it as an old man? And my answer was that God intervened and I had no power over it. I did get married early, but all of my sons and daughters died before I did. So now I am left to work the fields. Then the second question that the king asked was, how long were the white blossoms blooming on top of the sage mountain? Well, he was referring to my head and my white hair. And my answer was, about 40 years I've had white hair. Then the third question was, how long have the two rivers below the mountaintop been flowing? And what he was really saying was, when did my wife die? And my answer was 15 years ago, and I've been crying ever since, the two rivers being my eyes crying. And then the last question was, if and when the three silly geese from the east come, would I fleece them? And you three gentlemen are the three geese, and I have fleeced you well. And took their money and put it in the bag. And that's the king and the peasant. Okay, nobody's joined.
We could have a very short meeting tonight.
Yeah, I know, we will. I think I'll just put it on the chair.
There we go.
And I'm gonna move that chair over to the side. Okay, and I think it'll put you on the screen when you talk. Okay.
I have no idea because I can't see any difference when I talk.
Great.
Is it working?
As soon as we talk, you aren't, but we'll be quiet so you stay on the screen.
All right. So this is a story from the west of Africa. And there is a land there where the three most powerful beings out of all the animals are elephant, hippopotamus, and monkey. Now you may wonder at this because elephant and hippopotamus are both big and strong and obviously powerful, and monkey is, well, not. But so it goes, and I will explain why. In the old days, there was a dispute, and you see, the most powerful of all of the animals had sort of a throne for when the animals would gather. The most powerful would sit on their throne at the front of every gathering. And elephant and hippopotamus had their thrones, and every time the animals would gather, those two would sit at the front. And at one of these gatherings, monkey said, well, why am I not up there with you? I'm as strong as you are. I'm as powerful as you are. And elephant and hippopotamus both laughed and laughed and laughed. And the other animals just couldn't contain themselves, saying, hey, how could you be as powerful as elephant or as hippopotamus? Well, if you don't believe me, sometime I'm going to prove it. And he waited, not that day or the next, but on a day, days later, after people had forgotten how silly he had been, he walked up to Elephant and said, how are you doing, my friend? Remember how I said I would prove my strength? How about if I find a way to prove it tomorrow? Would you be willing to be tested? And Elephant said, well, yes, of course. Fine, fine. I'll tell you what. You wait right here tomorrow, and I will bring you a long rope, and we're going to have a tug of war. Elephant laughed at the idea and said, all right, but it will be a very quick contest. And Monkey said, oh, don't be too sure. I'm stronger than I look. And I'll tell you what, it may be a long battle or even a draw. If I can keep you busy and pulling until the rope breaks, will you acknowledge that I'm as strong as you are? Well, said the elephant, that would be excellent proof that you are very strong and at least worthy to sit with a hippopotamus and I. Okay, I'll be back tomorrow with the rope. Well, then he went to talk to Hippopotamus, who was bathing in mud down at the river. Hippo, my friend, my equal in power and strength. And Hippo snorted mud out of his nose because he thought that was so funny. What do you want? Well, I just remember I said that someday I would challenge you and your strength to show that I was as strong as you are. Well, how about if we have a test of strength tomorrow? All right, I have time tomorrow. Oh, good, good, good. I will bring you a long rope tomorrow, and we're going to have a tug of war. All right. And I'll even give you an advantage. You can stand there in the water where your strength is greatest. And if I can at least tie you in strength until the rope breaks, will you acknowledge that I'm as powerful as you are? If you can do that, then you'll show great strength. Fine. So it was that on the next day, early in the day, before it got too hot, he took a long, long, long rope, took one end to Elephant, and said, now, you wait until the sun is up over that branch of the tree, and then we'll start to pull, yes? And I'm going to go around the tree and off down the road because I want to be near where I can drink some water for the day in case it gets too warm and I get thirsty. Oh, all right, said Elephant. It won't take that long. He took the other end of the rope all the way down to the river where Hippo was standing. He said, Hippo, I brought the rope, and we'll start the tug of war when the sun is up. I'll go back into the distance in the trees and yell, and that's when you start to pull, all right? Hippo grabbed onto the rope and got ready to pull. Well, Monkey went back into the trees. He looked in the distance in one direction, and there was Elephant. He looked down the rope in the other direction, and there was Hippo. He was sure neither could see the other. He said, pull! And Elephant and Hippo both began to pull on the rope. Elephant pulled with all his might, and to his surprise, he didn't see Monkey flying at him from the other end of the rope. He felt a pull just as strong from the other end. Hippo, down by the river, pulled on the rope, and to his surprise, Monkey was pulling back just as hard. Elephant pulled, and Hippo pulled. Elephant pulled, and Hippo pulled. And they pulled and pulled and pulled, and by the time the sun was all the way up into the sky, they were both getting tired from their tug of war, and in fact, the rope was wearing out. Each of them gave one last gigantic pull, and the rope snapped and flew through the air toward them. Well, Monkey, who had been sitting watching all of this, got up and strolled toward Elephant. And he said, you caught the rope where it broke. Well, was that a tie? And Elephant said, you are much stronger than you look. That was a tie. And Monkey said, I'm going off to get a drink of water now. And he went off down to the river, and there was Hippo panting as he stood in the water, very tired. And Monkey said to Hippo, well, did I prove that I have strength? And Hippo said, you are so much stronger than you look. I admire you for having such strength in such a tiny body. And Monkey said to Hippo, well, I guess that next time we have a meeting of the animals, we'll have 3 thrones up front, yes? And Hippo said, yes, yes, I agree. And so it was that at the next gathering of the animals, there was Elephant's throne and Hippo's throne and a much smaller one for monkey. Because even if elephant and hippo figured out what monkey had done, they both knew that their strength was of the body, but monkey's strength was of the brain. And that had to be respected at least a little bit. And that is the story of why there are 3 thrones at the gatherings of animals.
Thank you, Nick. Great story. So what country was that from, or?
I believe it's given as being from Kenya, although I'm not absolutely certain, because some of the boundaries are not the old boundaries.
That's true. Yeah. Is Kenya West Africa or something?
Yes, West Africa. Well, actually, no, East Africa, sorry.
What?
No, Kenya is actually East Africa. I got to remember my stamp collecting days. It's Uganda, Kenya, and Tanganyika are the 3 East African nations.
Ah, okay. Well, so I have a question to pose. The last 2 months, I have told folk tales. Nick wasn't here last month, but last month was the King's Ears. You weren't here. And then this month was the King and the Peasant. And I'm trying to decide which one to tell this Saturday at the Bay Area Storytelling. Yeah, I was thinking with the one I told tonight was very short, and I thought I could preface it. In fact, I forgot to do it with telling the audience that one of the things that often appears in folk tales are riddles. And I would tell the audience that this folktale from Poland has riddles and challenge them to think about the riddles and see if they can come up with a solution. Just to try to make it a little bit longer, plus involve the audience. What do you think?
So the other one's a lot longer.
The other one's long.
I think you should retell it this week so that I can judge. There's plenty of time.
That's true. All right.
Well, how much time do you actually have for the time slots up there?
10 to 12 minutes. At first they said 10 minutes, and then they said 10 to 12. They definitely don't want it over 12.
Yeah.
I think a discussion on the riddles might get a little too convoluted because these are storytellers after all.
Yeah. That's true. Although there will be some storytellers.
You're going to tell?
Oh, okay. I suppose I could go ahead and tell the King's Ears, especially if that's the one I'm going to use for practice. Jane wasn't here and Nick didn't hear it. I've told it before. I don't know whether you remember, Nick.
Yeah, take the ugly wall out.
Hmm?
I'm cropping the wall. That's why you want to stand over there.
Oh, okay.
I wanted it all white. I didn't want that little brown thing. Telecommunication, great.
All right, so this is a folktale from Serbia, and it's called The King's Ears. Long ago, there was a king and a queen that had no children, and they've been trying for a while. And finally, the queen got pregnant, and it was that time. She was getting close to delivery. So the king was out in the hallway outside the royal bedroom, pacing up and down and up and down, and the midwife was in with the queen. And finally, the door opened, and the midwife said, "Your Majesty, you have a beautiful baby boy," but the king did not wait to hear the rest of her sentence, and he rushed into the room to see the baby boy. And the queen was holding the baby boy, and she held him up to the king and said, we have a beautiful baby boy, but the king grabbed the baby and didn't listen to what the queen was saying, and he was admiring this beautiful baby boy, but the boy was all wrapped up in blankets, and he wanted to see if he had any hair, because some babies are born with hair, some babies aren't. So he took the blanket off the baby's head, and boing, big ears popped up. And the king said, "Oh no!" And the midwife said, Your Majesty, it's okay, it's okay. Sometimes they grow out of it. This kind of thing can happen, but he can grow out of it." And the king said, "I don't think so. We have a problem here. How is he going to be respected by the people in the kingdom when he has the ears of a donkey?" And so the king and queen came up with a plan. They gave the midwife a bag of gold and had her escorted by members of the king's army to another kingdom, where she promised she would stay and not tell anybody about the baby. And then the king and queen decided that there would be no nursemaid. The queen would nurse the baby, which is not something queens usually do. And there would be nobody helping with the care of the baby. The king and queen would do all the care of the baby. And it worked out pretty well. And when they took the young prince out into the public, they had a special crown fit for him that hid the ears, so nobody could tell. And of course, as the prince grew, they had to make the crown bigger. And the queen got very good at cutting the prince's hair. They couldn't have the royal barber cut his hair because they didn't want anybody to know. This was a secret. And everybody loved the young prince. He was handsome. He was athletic. He grew to be a strong young man. And he was well educated and smart and kind. And everything was going as planned. Well, finally, the king and queen passed away, and the young prince became the new king. And everything was going just fine, except for one thing. His mother, the queen, was no longer around to cut his hair. And so it kept growing. And people started commenting, the king is really letting his hair grow pretty long. And so finally, the king decided he was going to risk it. And he called for the royal barber into his chamber, had everybody leave, and said, "I want you to give me a haircut and cut it pretty short because I don't want to do this very often." And he took off his crown, and of course, boing, the ears popped up, and the barber was kind of taken aback. But he went ahead and cut the king's ears, or not ears, the king's hair. And when he finished, the king asked the barber, "Now, do you notice anything unusual about me?" And the barber said, "Well, Your Majesty, I couldn't help but notice that you have the ears of a donkey." And the king picked up his sword and chopped off the barber's head. Then he put his crown back on, and he called for the guards, who came and disposed of the body. Well, this happened more than once. The king would let his hair get kind of long and call in a barber. They got a new royal barber when this one disappeared. And after a while, they started running out of barbers in the kingdom. And it finally came to the fact that there was only one barber left in the kingdom. And he was an old barber who had an apprentice, a young 12 or 13-year-old boy that had been studying under his mentor, the old barber. And when the king's messenger came and said, the king has requested you to come cut his hair, the old man said, "I can't, I'm sick, I can't go. My apprentice can go." And the messenger from the king said, "Well, he's just a boy." And the old barber said, "Yes, but he's been studying with me for over a year. He's quite good, quite capable. whenever I don't feel up to it, he's the one that cuts the hair of my customers. And he is quite capable. And so he told the boy to get his barber things together, and the boy did. And he went back to the castle, and the king saw him. He said, "What is this? You send me a child to cut my hair?" And the boy said, "Your Majesty, I have studied hard, and I had a good teacher. My mentor barber was excellent, and he taught me well. I can do the job." And so the king said, "Okay." And he took off his crown, and boing, the ears sprung up, and the boy smiled because he had heard he had heard a folk tale about brave men, brave warriors who, when they did something really brave, like rescue a damsel in distress or slayed a dragon or saved a city from attack, every time they did something brave, their ears would grow. And so he thought, boy, this must be a very brave king. And so he cut the king's hair. And when he finished, the king said, "Do you notice anything unusual about me?" And the boy said, "Well, I think you look great, Your Majesty. I think I did a great job cutting your hair." And the king said, "That's a good answer. You and I both know that I have ears larger than normal. And if you can keep that secret, you can stay as my personal barber." And the boy said, "I'd love to, Your Majesty." And so this young boy became the king's barber, and the king now got haircuts more often than before. And after a couple of years, the king and the boy grew close to each other, and the king would discuss some matters of state, problems in the kingdom, and the boy would have suggestions that really made sense. And the king became quite fond of him. And so things were going well, except for one thing. Have you ever tried to keep a secret that you can't tell anyone? After a while, it kind of eats on you, because the boy was afraid that he would slip and tell someone, and then he'd get his head chopped off, because the king would know who let the secret out. And so he became very anxious, and eventually became sick and bedridden. And the king sent word to the old barber, the boy's mentor, and the old barber came to visit him and said, what's wrong, my son?" And he said, "I can't tell you." And the old barber said, "Well, look, we're friends. I can keep a secret if you have a secret." And the boy said, "Oh, no, 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 no. It's too dangerous, because if you let the secret out, we both get our heads chopped off." So the old barber said, okay, I won't do that. "How about tell the priest?" "No, no, no, too dangerous." And then the old barber said, "You know what? When I was a boy, my mother told me that if I had a secret that I couldn't tell anybody, and it was a burden, I should go out into the forest, dig a hole, and tell the secret into the earth, and then cover it up. Why don't you try that?" And the boy said, "You know what? That might be worth the effort." And just the thought that he might have a solution made him feel a little bit better and less anxious. So the next morning, he got up bright and early. He was already feeling better, and he got a shovel and he went out into the forest, and he dug a hole in a clearing. There was nothing else around. And he got down on his hands and knees, and he said, "The king has the ears of a donkey." And then he covered up the hole. He felt so good. The weight had been lifted off of him, and he walked back with a bounce in his step and was feeling so much better. Well, the magic of telling the secret to the earth, the magic that removed the burden from him, did some magic overnight where that hole was. A willow tree grew. And I mean, it grew overnight into an adult tree. And willow branches are great for making flutes. And that day, some kids went out into the forest hunting for a good willow tree to make flutes from and sell them in the city, little penny whistles. And they saw this willow tree, and they cut off some branches, and they made little flutes out of them, and they brought them back into the city, or into the kingdom city where the palace was, and they started selling them. But when people would blow on the flute, it didn't play a musical tune, it actually sang a song. And the song was, "The king has the ears of a donkey." Well, you can imagine the surprise when the king was sitting out on his balcony and he started hearing from all over the city this song, "The king has the ears of a donkey." And he was upset. So he told his guards to go bring the boy barber to him. And actually by now he wasn't a boy, he was a young man. And the barber came in, and the king said, "How could you? You promised to keep the secret. How could you tell everyone that I had the ears of a donkey?" "But your majesty, I didn't tell anybody. I swear I didn't tell anybody. What I did was I went out into the forest, I dug a hole, and I got rid of the secret into the earth, and it made me feel better. But I did not tell a single soul, and there was no one around to hear me in that forest. I was all by myself." "Well," said the king, "show me." Because the king liked this young man, and he seemed to be sincere in telling the truth that he didn't tell anybody. So the young barber took the king out into the forest, and he took him to the clearing. He said, "This used to be a clearing. There was nothing here, and now there's this big willow tree. Where did that thing come from?" "You sure you're in the right spot?" said the king. "I'm positive," said it. And so the king cut off a branch, and he made a little whistle, and he blew on it, and it sang, "The king has the ears of a donkey." And so the king realized the boy really didn't break the promise. He didn't tell any person about the king's ears. And he realized what a burden he had put on this young man to keep that secret. And he finally realized it was time to let the secret out. Well, it already had been let out. It was time to own his physical presence. And he was a well-liked and respected king, except for the widows of the barbers didn't like him. But the rest of the kingdom liked him, and he was doing a good job. And so he kept the crown off, he carried it, and he walked back to the palace with the barber. And as he got closer, got into the city, and people saw he had these big donkey ears, and some of them giggled. Some of them said some not so nice things, but most of them sort of smiled and said, "Oh, that's interesting." And so he was eventually accepted as looking different than most kings, but he ruled wisely and justly. And through this experience, he kind of taught everybody in the whole kingdom a lesson. And that is, you don't judge a person by their looks. You judge a person by the quality of their character. And the king was a just and wise king, and therefore everyone accepted the fact that he had big ears, and it was no big deal. It didn't make a difference. And the king never married. I guess he wasn't that attractive to most females with his big ears, and so he didn't have any children. And eventually he had this barber become his chief advisor because the boy really had good common sense. And so when he got old and it was time to end his life, he made sure that everything was put in place that he would be replaced by the barber, an advisor, who would then become the next king. and everybody lived happily ever after.
I like that one.
Okay, we have Ron Chick joined us. Hi, Ron.
Ron Evans, I think.
Oh, Ron Evans. I'm sorry, he's in a little box there. So, Ron, do you have a story? No, no, you can't hear? No headphones.
No, he's been trying different things with his sound, and for some reason it's not coming through.
Oh. I don't think I can unmute him. Let me
No, no. He tried a couple of different things. He's having trouble linking and getting sound.
ask to unmute. That's funny. I can mute him, but I can't unmute him.
Mute and unmute.
You just did unmute him, didn't you?
Mute and then unmute.
But his sound isn't coming through, and apparently it's both ways.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's too bad. Well, I'll have to send him an email and maybe make a technology visit before our next meeting. See if I can figure out what the problem is. Okay, well, let me put this back here.
So do you still want input on which story?
Yeah.
I would do the Polish one, because I think it's a more interesting story. The one with the donkey ears, there are at least 3 different versions that have been done in the storytelling world, and I still have a problem with the story, the version that you tell, because the king actually wasn't a good person, and he wasn't a noble person.
Oh,
Yes. So
okay, that's interesting.
I've seen the children's book and illustrations are great. I think we did that one.
So did in the versions you've heard, did the experience of showing his ears change his personality?
The one that I liked, I think did, but the problem is that he's just the way the version that you tell, he's basically a tyrant up to the point where he changes his mind about his ears. And there's never any real redemption of his personality. There's never any justification for him suddenly being nice because he's killed all of those people for no good reason.
Okay, good point.
But I think it's just, like I said, that's that one. There's the Serbian version, there's a Greek version, and years ago, one of the major storytellers redid it as kind of a fake African story that was just really weird. And she was highly regarded for it, but I didn't think much of it. Hers was if you ever see a version of it online, I think hers was the King of Togo Togo, something like that. But anyway, the whole thing is, it's a weird story to me because there isn't really a redemption to justify the happy ending, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But also, I think the other story is just a better story in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I like stories with riddles.
Mm-hmm. It's a riddle story, and it's a fun riddle story because it also says that the king basically rewards somebody for being intelligent enough to be able to answer him real time.
Right. Okay. Thanks for the input.
There's 4 children's books out.
But what about your comment about not introducing it with telling them there's a riddle and asking them to see if they can figure it out?
I honestly don't think you need to do that. I think that the story is clear enough that the bulk of the audience is going to enjoy the way it unfolds without being told about the story ahead of time.
All right. Okay. Yeah, thanks for the input. So, Ron Chick, do you have a story?
Oh, both Rons are on?
I mean, Ron, oh, gee, I did it again.
Ron Evans.
It's Ron Evans and he can't hear us and we can't hear him.
Yeah, that's the problem that because he was signaling while you were telling your story, he tried even to do a second load in of Zoom and it just wasn't working. Something is wrong at his end because he couldn't hear or be heard. He tried earphones, he tried other things. Something's not working on his computer.
Yeah.
Because when mine was doing that, I was doing the weekly thing for the club, and I ended up having to use my phone instead.
Huh.
He may want to try his phone, it was no.
Yeah.
Up here he comes again.
Well, I'll email Ron and see if I can maybe help. You know, I used to do tech support at the school I worked
But it hurts because you're retired now.
at. Yeah. I
So-
when I retired from school, at the retirement party we had, the staff gave me a shirt, a custom made shirt that said, "No, I will not fix your computer."
I love it.
So John, how did things go for you at the county fair?
It was a little disappointing. There was a lot of downtime. Basically, Ron Chick and I had an audience that they sort of gathered together, which was mostly the volunteers at the other booths. And that lasted like for 15 or 20 minutes, and that went well. Maybe well, I told a couple stories, maybe a half an hour. We told stories, and that was well received. But other than that, we were just sitting around trying to entice people to come to listen to stories, and we got maybe twice we enticed people to come over, you know, a family or a couple another time and listen to one story, and that was it.
Yeah, that was actually kind of the experience. On Mother's Day, it was blazing hot in addition. And so the biggest crowd I had was mostly of the volunteers from over at the plant booths.
Yeah.
But there was one of the young men there who was actually very interested in storytelling, and he may end up showing up at the Inland Valley sometime or coming to one of the concerts because he was really just interested in the concept of storytelling. So we'll see if that happens. But most of the time, I had just a few people there, including a friend of mine that I told about the storytelling stuff. Um, but the volunteers, there was one young lady at the booth next to where the storytelling was that was doing this craft program, and twice when they didn't have any kids, she came over to listen to the stories. So she was interested, but the young man from the plant area was asking me questions and stuff afterwards about storytelling. So um, that was interesting. The lady whose domain that whole area was the one who got the volunteers to come over the first time, and I think after that they were just interested in hearing stuff.
Yeah. So I don't know whether we'll try it again next year or not. What do you think?
I think that well, okay. One of the tricks was that when I got there, they didn't really know where they wanted the storytelling to be.
Yeah.
And I looked at the options, and the one with the canopy over both the stage and the audience was the one that I chose. So I think that's probably where they had you going, right?
Yeah, so where we finally ended up doing stories, there were bales of hay that people could sit on.
Yes,
Yeah, and it was kind of a stage area, and they had some planned events there.
right.
Um, Before that, they just had us sitting at a table not too far from that place.
Yeah, and that wasn't going to work because there was no place to perform for an audience.
Right.
So the place with the bales of hay, weirdly enough, on Mother's Day, the guy who was supposed to be doing the scheduled stuff wasn't actually there because he showed up and he was assuming that he was going to be indoors because there's another facility they have where they do indoor workshops. and he thought he was going to be in there. So he had everything prepared for doing like a PowerPoint presentation and stuff like that about composting. And when he found out he wasn't going to be there and didn't have a place to project stuff for an audience and no audience, he basically left.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what happened with us. There was someone scheduled to perform at 1, and they got notice that the person wasn't going to make it. So that's when they let us use that space, was at 1 o'clock.
Yeah. So with that planned in advance, I think we can schedule the storytelling for an actual time slot there, so that it doesn't have to be ad hoc, and so that it can be like they had a chalkboard and they put things up on the chalkboard after I first did something there, and that at least drew a couple of people for things later. But if they have that as part of the announcements for the day, I think that will help.
Yeah, me too. And instead of having us have a 5-hour block where we're mostly just sitting twiddling our thumbs, schedule us for either 1 or 2 time slots.
Yes.
When we used to perform, we had a whiteboard, and we would put on it, next performance, such and such a time. And then we would put the 3 skits, or we would do 3 stories. And then it would change, because we would all take a half-hour break, go on the train, come back, and then do it again.
Yeah.
So, and if it's a shady area, people will go and sit there temporarily, and if it's soon for the show, you'll have your audience.
Yeah.
But we would also send the girls out to say, you know, the shows are gonna start in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see, I had acquaintances who were performing on one of the other little stages, and was able to give them some feedback about what their stage was going to be like, because they had so many little stages this year because of that one music event they were doing. They had a lot of singer-songwriters coming and doing short sets on little stages all over the fair. And that was okay, but they didn't really have good positions for a lot of them. They positioned them to minimize sound bleed and not really to make sure that they were going to have audiences, if that makes sense. So the one that was over closest to where you were, they had audiences of 4 or 5 people on their stage simply because nobody knew there was a stage there, and there was no place comfortable to sit that wasn't in the sun.
Yeah.
We should suggest they give a whiteboard.
Yeah.
In shade. And shade.
Well, there was some shade there where the bales paved.
Yes. Yeah, there was enough shade so that at least a dozen people could sit there and be in the shade. More than that could be there, depending on time of day. There might or might not be shade. But the one that I had, there was seating, comfortable seating for at least a dozen people there, pretty much all day. It's just we never had more than that, just because there was no walking traffic along that path, because it was really at a dead end as far as how people would go places.
Yeah, exactly. It was a dead end.
And a couple of arrows pointing to.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
So how is it different from the time that we did it in Ontario, whatever that was?
You were on a map. You were actually on a map.
yeah. But that also was kind of off to the side as well.
Which helps because other people are talking and do need to be a little bit.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, but that was much more organized.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Because you were actually on the first show.
Yes.
But I would say that that farm area worked as far as a location if you can just get people in there. And I think having done it this year helps, because the woman in charge of that area now knows what we were proposing as far as the storytelling.
Yeah. No, okay. Well, we'll see what Marlene says, what feedback she got. Hmm?
Are we still?
Yes. I guess we can stop the recording.
Good.
Yeah.
I'll just sit up straight.
Yeah, let me stop the recording here.